So as I said, what we're gonna do is I'll put the screen sharing on at some point, and we'll just hop in and out of basically Noesis and Counter Strike, yeah. And we'll just talk about a few range of topics. So I don't exactly 100% know where or what we spoke about the other week, but I'm gonna have a guess because you mentioned with the whole 1-on-1 system. I just briefly introduced sort of a more free and open default system, right? So
Yeah.
what's our general takes on that? Is that like something that we're interested in doing, or you're more into the whole strat thing? Because I don't want to. We need to cater this towards what you guys want more preferable, rather than what do I think's best. You know.
Well, in all honesty, it seems to be that like we're kind of inheriting like both aspects from it.
Right. Okay. Like what I'll do today is I think that we should take this sort of 1-on-1 system. We should talk about how do we develop from that, and how do we actually push as individuals and learn how to introduce that properly. Because as you guys, I think someone said the other day that obviously you have the whole we can just pug it type of mindset, which is perfectly fine and that works with this, but you have to then go a step past that point, and you have to go from pugging to how do you structure a full out team play within a default so that it's completely open end and the in-game leader doesn't have to put in a lot of effort, you know? That's the hard part. So the first thing we'll do at the start is obviously I want to talk a little bit about my background and what I've learned in my field and how that can apply to Counter-Strike. So obviously I'm an engineer, and the one thing that I've learned over my time doing this is basically it's all about problem solving, right? And I feel like this is one of the most important things within Counter Strike is problem solving. Now, you guys have probably heard of like the 10,000 hour thing, right? Where you have to do something for 10,000 hours before you can be a professional at it. Has everyone sort of heard that? That's like a general outline, in my opinion. If you do something for 10,000 hours and you just sort of do it like as like a hobby or something, and you don't necessarily put in maximum effort, 10,000 hours should just about do it before you become a professional or something. However, I feel like you can massively, and I mean massively, reduce that number down if you introduce the right methods of self-improvement and actually focusing on what the hell am I meant to do. Like a lot of players play games like Counter-Strike or first-person shooters or real-time strategies, whatever the game is. A lot of people just aimlessly play. They'll come on for the day. They might do a little bit of aim prac. You might come online. You might do some scrims with the boys, and then you'll go off and you'll play pugs till 4 in the morning. It's not a massively overproductive way of playing. It's just sort of you're just playing and just generally getting some stuff out of it. I think the most productivity that you guys might have, and you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but it will probably be team prac, where someone will come online and basically put some stuff forward, and you guys will focus on that. That'll probably be the highest amount of productivity that you get in a day, right? So I think what we want to try and do is I want to try and introduce a couple methods which we use, like especially at my job, which I'm in right now, which I think are really high efficiency, and I've tried to find a way of applying them to CS so that it also works with CS. Now, what we're going to have to unfortunately do is we're going to have to introduce a couple of ideas which are to do with cars before we get onto the bigger picture of a team. But it will make sense as you go on. So, what'll be the best way of doing this? I would usually show sort of like actual diagrams and stuff, but I feel like that would be a massive breach of my personal working contract, so we won't do that for today. So we will just talk, if that's okay with you guys. You guys are just gonna have to use your imagination and sort of understand what it is exactly the point that I'm trying to make. So obviously, we have to think like you have to think as you guys as a unit, right? So obviously you're all individuals, you all want to improve individually, but you're playing open, you're playing a season together. Therefore, you need to function as a team. And one of the things that British teams really struggle on the most is the team aspect. There's a lot of good individual skill in the UK. I know you're not all from the UK, but I want to generally talk on terms of like a British players, because the majority of you are British, right?
Yeah.
But to
Five
look
out
up
of six.
to Okay, to look up to teams like Endpoint, for example, they've sort of like broken the system where they're a good team and they're good individuals, which is something which hasn't really been done that often before. So it's about getting to that point. Now, we can basically, there's a big quote which we use at work all the time, which is you're only as quick as your slowest part. So what that basically means is you can imagine if you have a big factory to make cars go through at a certain speed, basically what you want to do applies to Counter-Strike in every way. So if you have a team of 5 guys, it could be 6, depending on the structure of the team, then you want to make sure that there's no person lagging behind. Everyone puts in the same amount of effort. No one wants to be that guy who isn't putting in more effort, less effort than the rest of the guys, you know? And if you see your teammates doing that, it's then your responsibility to assist them and pull them up with you, you know? So if you're putting in more effort than the rest, it's about how do I assist that person in becoming more efficient, more better at basically improving, introducing new things to his teammates, etc., etc. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, the way we do this at work and the way we do, like, I think we can do this in Counter-Strike is 2 completely different ways. But like, I have a general idea which I've been working on, which is basically if you're ever confused about something. So I'll give a couple of scenarios. So let's say we're playing on the CT side. Who's the 2A side, guys? Who's the setup for, let's say, this type of scenario where one guy's here, one guy's here, and you find yourself in a scenario where the guy on site doesn't know what the pit guy's looking at a particular moment, and the guy in pit isn't necessarily aware, is this guy on site potentially watching long? Is he potentially watching short? Is he watching bulk? If you're ever in a situation where you can't fully understand what the situation might entail, then this would be, for me, an improvement point at that point. So what you can do is during a scrim, if you have a notepad next to you, if you ever come into a situation where you have to question what's happening here, it could be anything, you know. This is just one scenario of potentially hundreds of thousands, but it could be any scenario where you genuinely have to question what is going on exactly in this moment. Then what I would say is write it down, just a general note, and then let's talk about it after the fact. Now what I would recommend doing is never put anything fast, like properly in place. So, for example, in a scenario like this, if you don't know, in this situation where, let's say, you lose your long player, and they could potentially come long, and you got a guy on pit and you've got a guy on site, you don't want to make something completely secure in place that you do every time. For example, you don't want to make sure, okay, let's say we organize that the site guy definitely watches long and the pit guy watches short and balcony. Okay, that would be dangerous because it could be exploited. But what you should do is you should set yourself guidelines for it. In these scenarios where you're ever confused, you should try and basically set yourself guidelines for how you might approach this type of situation. So that's just one example, but not just about being confused, but it's about absolute magnitude of things. So, for example, it could be, let's say you're on the T side, you're coming up long. Let's say you've got a smoke here, you've got a smoke in library. Do you have a strat or anything like that for this? Do you call it anything in particular, or not really? Not yet. Now, let's say you're on the T side, you're in a prac, you come up, and you get blinded by that. I don't know. I don't have a refro. Do we have a refro on this server? No, right? Okay, we do. Let's say this happens and you die from it, right? In my eyes, I'd basically try and write that down because it's a scenario in which you had the best plan for it. Your in-game leader called something, you followed the plan, but you got absolutely out of your control. And then what I would do is basically after the fact is, how do you avoid this? So as I said, you don't want to make something concrete, right? You don't want to say, okay, when we're coming up, you want one guy playing anti-flash, he's definitely got to play anti-flash. The other guy, he's got to be holding the left wall or something. But what I'd say is try and create some guidelines. So you might want to openly discuss things and bounce ideas off one another. So that happened the last time. Now, obviously, in a situation like this, very difficult. You know, there's not a lot you can do. But this is where you would discuss as a whole team. Someone writes it down after the prac, right, boys, this is how we died. This is the way it happened. Did we do the right thing? Yes, we did. So how do we stop it? So obviously we did this with Endpoint one time, and we had a suggestion. Instead of throwing a smoke that basically lands really deep in, you instead throw a smoke which has a bit of a like an outer curve like this. And what we say is, if we get blind by this flash, if someone can, oh, you can't refrow that, can you? Let's say you can someone click the refrow? Yeah. So in that situation, a blind player could then jump into this smoke, you know, and just wait until they're not blind and then come back out. You know what I'm saying? So that's basically, we saw a problem, so we died. There wasn't anything we could do about it. We followed exactly the way we wanted it to do, how we wanted it to go. And we discussed for 10 minutes on how we could basically try and avoid that. People were coming up with, you know, we could play anti-flash, we could do all these different things. But what we said is, general guideline, you know, there's not a lot you can do in this situation. We're just going to potentially, if you get blind, jump into that smoke, wait until your blindness is gone, and then continue back out. Now, a lot of teams actually do this. We saw Navi do this, like basically after we came up with the idea. But that's like one of these things where it's really, really good, boys, to have this constant improvement of, you see something that didn't necessarily go right, even if it was absolutely correct on your behalf, you did exactly what you were supposed to do, and it still didn't go right, then you might just want to write it down, you know? And if it goes completely wrong, the same thing. So just make a mental note, or just note it down on a notepad. And then after the prac, you can basically bring up these things. So as I said, it's not just about whether it was wrong, but it's also in the right kind of scenarios. Now, we haven't at all talked about defaulting now, and that's basically the point that we wanted to bring home, right? You guys, I believe we wanted to talk over today about the whole defaulting thing, and sort of the self-improvement aspect of that, and how do we get onto this whole 1-1-1 thing? Is that's the direction we want to move today, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So how do we apply that to defaulting? Now, defaulting is supposed to be very free, very open in my eyes. There's obviously lots of different ways you can default. You can have a very strategic style default, but in my eyes, you just basically choose a method that works for you, and everything can basically work. It doesn't matter what you do, as long as you do it as a team, you execute it as a team, you're basically you're gonna do just fine. But I'm gonna talk about my 1-1-1 system, and it's completely open end on my half. So I'm just gonna introduce something that I personally think's good, and you guys can obviously decide on that yourself. Obviously, I think it's good to get my opinion, and not just me try and say stick to what you guys know or want, you know. So obviously, let's talk about that 1-1-1 system. So as we mentioned before, if you want to quickly jump on Discord, we'll now go on the screen sharing. Just let me know if you can see my screen. Give me a second. All right, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So obviously now,
give me a second. My mouse has just died and won't go back on.
one of the questions which I did want to ask is, how often do you guys ever note stuff down of things that you did well, or things that you thought you executed properly but they didn't work, or if you feel like something went wrong and you're not even sure why? Have any of you ever really written any of that stuff down? Like, honestly.
I mean, we don't really write about scenarios. It's more just kind of like what went wrong in that scrim, in like the general, whether it was like communication or
Right.
like and whatnot. So it's
Okay.
not really like round 13 when we executed, we like the enemy flashed and we all died to it. We
Yeah.
don't really write anything like that. But
Okay. So
Alright.
obviously, my recommendation would be, obviously after this talk today, you guys can discuss what we talk through today, and you can decide whether you want to do it or whether you don't. But my say is, go through everything with an open mind. And my opinion is, always try anything new. So when I say get a notebook next year, and even when you did something perfectly and it worked perfectly, if you feel like it could have been better, or you didn't stick to the script and you sort of went off a little bit and you did something else, was that the better way of doing it over what you originally had planned, etc., then write that down. You know what I mean? Because as we'll discuss right now, let's say you have a certain way that you want to take some form of control. Like what we're going to talk about now is basically trying to get like starters, or ways that you're going to take control in these sort of 1-1-1 groupings. let's say you have a general guideline, as we mentioned. So we'll get into this now. Is basically what you have is you have 3 basic in-game leaders, right? So you've got one for mid, you've got one for apps, you've got one for banana. Now, what these guys can basically, what you can do is all of these maps, you have this system, you have 3 individuals. Now, what you can basically do is don't set something in stone, but rather guideline yourself. So what you can say is, I'm the mid player. Who is that on this map? For T side.
Me.
Think about, who are my floats? Who's going to be the people who realistically join me when I'm taking mid? Could it be just one guy? Could it be 2 guys? Could it be all 5 guys? These are the things you need to think about. And then what you want to do is basically discuss with them and give some general guidance of how do you as the mid player want to take mid. So for example, Crazy might decide, okay, we're going to go for the 2020 Astralis mid take, which is basically the smoke long and the molly short, the molly deep short. So that's pretty standard. Teams even still use that to this day. It's not really died out too much in basically the 2 years it's been in use. But that could be a general guidance. You know, you've got 2 basic utility usage, and everything else past that point could be pretty much open end. So what you could do is you could call out something specific. As I said, Crazy could call that, let's just do Astralis mid. You can throw this smoke from many, many different locations. You can throw this molly from also many different locations. And you've got many different ways of entering. You can come all out mid. You can do a mid split like this. You can have a guy jump out about like this. You've got loads of different scenarios, but it's, as I said, it's a general guidance. There's nothing really set in stone past the point of just general utility usage. Now, the whole setting a guideline thing and not necessarily setting something like in stone is 5 different ways of taking mid. You know, 5 different ideas, all rough guidelines. He's discussed them with all of his teammates, right? And let's say, okay, we'll just call it phase again. We're going to use phase for basically every example today. We say phase is, I don't know, also this smoke, but instead of this molly, it's a molly which lands here. And then it could be different types of flashbangs or different ways of entering. So we might also say, okay, and that means that we're going to first take apps, and then we're going to entry from here and here at the same time. Now, let's say that's the general guideline. You've got your entry directions, so apps and mid. You've got the utility that you want to throw. And then after that, it basically doesn't matter. You can throw whatever flashbangs you want, whatever. And you can do whatever after you've got mid control. So you can approach that situation with your guideline. You can then do it 10, 15 different times, and they could always be different. But what you want to do is, let's say you do it and it works perfectly, right? Then you want to potentially make a mental note of why it worked perfectly. Like, this would be for you, Crazy, obviously, because you're the guy in charge. You know, you write it down. Okay, it worked because of that, or like it worked because of what situation did that work in. You do it the next time, but you maybe change one factor. Maybe this time, instead of a throw and a flashbang off this wall like this, which lands above the guy entering out boiler, you might have a guy bottom mid throw a flashbang which pop flashes here, for example. Does the pop flash work better? And if it does, write that down. You know, it's this constant improvement that you basically want to think about. And as you basically play more and you play more and you approach these situations 10, 15, 20, 30 different times, you're going to see all the different ways that you do something, because the default, as I said, is an open end. And if you guideline things and you don't set them in stone, like, okay, when we enter mid, we're going to throw exactly this flash, we're going to throw exactly this molly, we're going to do exactly this, but you just learn as you go, learning by doing. And this is basically my concept that I'm trying to introduce like a lot more in CS is, when you do something, write it down why it worked or why it didn't work. Then the next time you approach the situation, try and improve it. So for example, at the end of the day, if you've been playing Inferno all day, Crazy, and you've been doing different mid takes with different players, you've been doing different scenarios, this is what really worked well. This is what worked, but I think could be better. And this is what didn't work, and this is why, you know? And then basically you improve on that. So it's not just about highlighting, really about drilling home what went good. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of people always say, how you could have improved. You might annihilate someone 16-0 or 30-0, but you could have potentially done it in a way which was just 10 times more spectacular. And this is the thing, is don't always just think about the bad stuff, but always think about, okay, how could we have done that way more efficiently, way better? How could we have done that similar situation with using less utility, you know? And this is what Gambit do. So obviously, does everyone get that point? I obviously only use crazy as an example, but it's just a quick example of basically it's that it's a guideline system where you don't introduce too many factors that are set in stone, so that you can always review and improve. Right? Everyone gets it. There's no confusion there.
Yep.
Right. Now we're going to use Gambit in this exact scenario, and hopefully you all watch Gambit, and you have all watched Gambit for I hope 9 or so months, so that this will make all sense. Hopefully we all have watched Gambit, right?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So when Gambit first, unfortunately I don't have concrete evidence because I'm on my laptop right now. I would usually have after this session, I can, if you guys really need it, I can potentially go and find it. So Gambit today, as of like basically the last few months, they use 3 smokes for this map in particular. They use stairs, heaven, and front toilet. And as for Molotovs, they use also 3. So they use not exactly what you guys call this. What do you call this? What do you all call it? What's that?
Banana with an yeah.
Banana. Okay, that's probably the first time I've ever heard that one.
That's not banana. Is that Molly? That's the door down to CT. Is that not by ABC?
Where is that?
That's what I call jungle. It's on overpass. It's outside of lower.
Yeah. We'd call it hell or CT.
Right. So this is the 6 pieces of utility that Gambit are currently using for overpass. Now, what's really unique about these utility is how and where you can use them. So basically the smokes. So this smoke can not only be thrown from this area, but it can also be thrown from this area. This heaven smoke, not only can it be thrown from obviously here and here, but it can also be thrown from inside toilets. And the stairs smoke on A. So again, not only can it be thrown from obviously this area here and this area here, but it can be thrown right outside the toilet area. Now what this allows Gambit to do is with these 3 smokes, they can, at this current stage is basically they've optimized their smoke usage so much that they only use 3 particular smokes, which basically makes it very, very, very difficult to understand, one, where have they thrown the smoke from, in what context have they thrown the smoke. Obviously, they're very, very good at playing this map anyway, so they really do punish mid-round aggression. So it's hard to really get any info on them anyway. And then obviously, thirdly, is the smokes are so particular that they can be thrown from basically anywhere and they can be anywhere. So they could have one guy here, and they could just, or if they throw that stair smoke 4 times in a row and always go A, and then throw it a 5th time, but then go B, it's very, very difficult to know if they're going to go A or not, because they only throw that one smoke when they go A, you know? They can instantly dive down here, and they could also have like 3 guys waiting out here, 1 in here, and 1 basically outside toilet. Now, this doesn't look like anything spectacular, hopefully, to you guys, because it really isn't. It's just some very, very simple utility usage, pretty standard for most pro teams nowadays. No one really uses anything more complex. Only sort of the tier 3, tier 2 teams really do that. But getting to this point, basically, Gambit used to use a lot more utility than this. So when I first started watching them when Hobbit first joined, they use this smoke here, this smoke here, this smoke here, this smoke here, the one that lands here, the one that lands here, the one which lands on short, the one which lands center site, the 2 which land here and here, the one which lands outside monster, and the one that also lands here to not give the one way for barrels. And think that's about it. And as for Molotovs, they also used to use an absolute like load. Now, what they've basically done is over time, they found ways of how do we use less utility. So they've done this for basically every map, but Overpass has been the map that they've achieved it the best on. All you have to do is watch an Overpass, any map of Gambit, and you'll see them basically doing this exact thing. Is they've slowly reduced the amount of utility over time. So they didn't just do it all at once. They didn't just immediately come onto the server and was like, bang, right, boys, we're only throwing 3 smokes. You obviously have to push your playstyle into that. Now, for me, I obviously spent a lot of time watching them while at Endpoint because Endpoint's main map was Overpass. When you watch all of their games one after another for the last basically 50, 60 Overpass games, they slowly used less and less. Now, I don't think that's possible unless you have what we just talked about. You know, we talked about that set yourself guidelines, you know, whoever the A player is on this map, okay, how do you want to take mid? You know, you might use this smoke sometimes, you might use this molly, you might even use this smoke, you know. It's not really very common nowadays, but people sometimes still use the big smoke from down here, or you can also throw it from here, for example. Again, not many people throw the molly there anymore. That's basically been wiped out at the pro scene, but teams at the tier 4, tier 5 level, sort of advanced main level, they're still using the molly there. Now, you set those guidelines, you have some general ideas of how you want to take mid, etc. And then over time, you start, okay, how do we improve that? Okay, we did this and this is how it worked, but could we have gotten away with not using the Molotov, with not using a particular flash, etc. Using yet less utility, but do it in a more efficient way, not just immediately eradicating utility in priority of aim, etc. Because that's a bad idea. But how do you get more efficient at it, you know? Now, the only way you can do that, boys, is with this review. Like, you have to be able to look at what you did correct and what you did wrong and actually analyze it and say, you know, could you have done it better? You know what I'm saying? So every time, as I said, I'm going to keep saying this and it's really repetitive and it's annoying, but when you do something right, you have to write down why and if it could have been better than it was, you know, and doing this in a prac is, that's basically that. Is everyone sort of on that concept now of basically that slowly but surely improving the way you play? Obviously, really sorry that I don't have any concrete examples right here, but I can hopefully get some maybe later tonight or tomorrow.
Ethan's just
yeah.
disappeared.
Ethan?
Whip crack devil.
Oh, okay.
He's just left.
Do you want to give it a pause for a second? Or we can just, has anyone got any questions? Like while Ethan's trying
Nope,
to
he's
reconnect?
back
Oh,
now.
he's back. Has anyone got any questions? That's more of an important thing right now. Obviously, I've just introduced. So has anyone got anything they want to ask before we continue?
This might be obvious, but like, for example, you do like what you said, like on Inferno, that phase one taking long. If you get purely out aimed, there's not much point in writing it.
No, not really. What are you meant to do? You know?
Yeah, exactly. Aim better.
I mean, you might get out aimed, but you might be able to ask yourself, did I misplay, for example? I think Whipcrip's dip in and out, as I think his connection might be not the greatest. Yeah, like obviously being out aimed, purely out aimed is one thing, but being out aimed because of a personal mistake or a mistake of a teammate is another thing. Now,
Yeah.
what you don't want to do in those situations, especially if it's a teammate, is immediately jump on a teammate. Never jump on a teammate, in my opinion. If the best thing to do is it's like a method we use at work called stacking the deck. So you should write down multiple examples of where someone makes the same mistake over and over again. If you, let's say Crazy runs out mid, right, and you won. You're not gonna see any valuable change. Now, let's say you see an example of Crazy runs out mid. He does a particular thing. Okay, you can accept that. Write that down. That particular thing that happened. Let's say the same situation comes up another time, let's say the next game or even in the same game, write it down again. And when you have 4 or 5 examples of where someone's made the same critical mistake, which has cost either them the round or you as a team the round, then that's when you can present that evidence forward. It's very, very hard to argue against a stacked deck, you know? Like when you're sat there and someone's like, okay, here's a really, or not even my opinion, it's just generally good to have some really concrete evidence as to why something didn't work, especially when it's for your teammates, you know? But that would be one of my biggest recommendations because I see this so often. Like I've coached so many teams over the years, and there's a lot of young people play this game, and they've been brought up to understand that they have. And I think that that's like a really like it can be a really good thing to do for some players, but for others it's just an absolute morale killer. It just so more present some good concrete evidence and potentially not only about saying what they did wrong, but a recommendation of how they could improve that. So, for example, I don't know. We'll go back to this phase example because it's the freshest in the mind. If you see someone constantly running up here and just getting, but let's say over a week you see that 3 or 4 times, then that would be a point to say, okay, here's something that you did wrong. My recommendation would be, you know, potentially more hug the left wall and then give some evidence as to why you might want to do that, you know? Don't just say like, oh, here's something that you did wrong and then bang, just leave it at it. As we'll bring it back to the first point that I made. You're only as fast as your slowest moving part. And we apply that to CS and you're only as good as your weakest link. It's the exact same concept, right? So when you see someone having a bad performance or you see someone doing something not particularly great, you don't just want to bite at it and immediately try and shut the person down and bring something forward that could potentially actually like assist that fact, right? Right. Now, obviously, this is all really easy to say and it's well done, but I feel like what we need to do is now we need to go over a couple of examples on how we can basically really, really like concrete this in everyone's head so that they understand what exactly I'm trying to get at. Because it's great me just saying, oh, you need to have a broad spectrum of examples on how and what you need to improve on and what you need to write down. So obviously, we're talking about a 1-1-1 system. The main people that are going to be responsible for change in this type of system are these 3 players, right? So it doesn't matter where you are. That I think. All right. What's your like? Yeah. So we'll stick with Inferno. So obviously these 3 players on the T side. We will get onto CT side, by the way, because I feel like that's really, really important and people neglect it. But the 3 most important players are obviously going to be these 3. And as I said, the easiest way can basically introduce a system into your team where these 3 players are constantly adapting and changing. It becomes almost impossible to have any form of like ability to be counter stride. And as I said, the way you do that is obviously you set your guidelines. So what I'll say is you as a team, you want to decide on how you want to play. So some teams might say we preferably want to have banana first, you know? If that's the way you want to go, then you might want to structure your default to be more adapted to that. So you might want to start your games potentially 3-1-1. And as the game goes on, you might want to see, you know, what kind of reactions you're getting from your team. I don't know how much detail did we talk about the 1-1 system? Did we talk about the communication and how to talk with one another and stuff? Or
I think you briefly mentioned about the increase of channels between everyone.
right?
Like instead of having IGL, maybe having 5 or 6, it was like 13 or something.
Yeah. Okay. So that's all great being said, but let's like try and put some sense into them. So what you might want to do is, as I said, let's say you might want to decide as a team, you might want to talk. How do you get your input of your in-game leader? How do you want to play? And you might have some general guidelines. So you might want to say, okay, we preferably want to have banana control before we take mid control. We might sometimes want to have apps control before we take mid control. We might want to have mid control before we then take apps control. You know, you've got all of these different scenarios in which you can put forward. And now there's the communication which comes in place. So obviously you have your in-game leader, and then you have these 3 players, and then you usually then have 2 floats. So you might want to start the game depending on what you generally want to achieve as a team. So topple the in-game leader. So he might say, okay, we might want to aim, you know, generally more towards banana control this game. So that might mean you want to this player who plays banana, my opinion, would have the ability to say what he believes is best catered for that. So, for example, if it's banana control is going to be a focal point, then this player, as the anchor for basically banana, can say, right, I feel like we might be able to get this with just 2 guys. So you might bring 1 float player over, you know? Now, if you feel like that isn't enough, then you can bring 2 float players over. And if you still feel like that isn't enough, then you can bring potentially your apps player or your mid player. It doesn't matter who you bring, but it's about being adaptive in these positions. And this is basically how you base this system is you have your in-game leader outline what it is you want to do, and then you have the players in these positions which basically move and cater towards that. So as I said, taking mid control. You know, if the mid guy feels that when you take mid control, let's say in the mid game, there's never any opponents there. So you might want to question, is it because they're easily forced off mid? Can I potentially get away with taking a little bit more risk and taking mid control early as a solo player to push them out of mid because they usually just leave it anyway, so they might be easily prone to that happening. So you might want to have a default which is like, let's say 2-on-2, you know, and that can come from the mid player, you know, deciding how you might want to set out your default depending on what information does he have from previous rounds, how has he approached different situations, etc. And the same with apps. So in the same situation, your apps guy might come into apps one round, no one in apps. Come into the apps the next round, no one in apps. And then you might do some mid splits where the apps player potentially goes in out in mid, and there's also nobody there, or there's very, very little resistance. And that could basically be these 2 players could communicate. We don't need any float players with us. We can basically clear apps in mid alone, just us 2. We don't need anybody. And in which situation then you might just want to stick with a 3-on-1 type of system, you know? So it's all about this constant stream of comms, but it has to come basically from these 3 players as like the main driving force, and then the in-game leader basically saying how it is that it needs to be played out, you know, because you don't want to have these guys in-game leading, you know, these guys here, these are anchors for these positions. They're in control of taking these positions. The one thing you don't want to do is have crazy in mid being told how to take mid. You don't want to have whoever the apps guy is being told how to take apps, and you most certainly don't want to have the banana guy being told how to take banana. If that ever happens, write it down. You know, as we mentioned, you're in a situation where you're potentially confused. Your in-game leader's micromanaging you. In my opinion, if I was being micromanaged, that's an immediate thing for me to say, right, I'm not doing a good enough job that my in-game leader doesn't think I'm competent enough to think of my own utility, to think of my own way for taking this control here. So therefore, I need to write that down, and I need to ask why I'm being micromanaged, or why is it my in-game leader's coming up with these ideas and I'm not? You know, micromanagement isn't always a bad thing, but it's usually an indication of either trust issues or that you're not coming up with the right ideas in the opinion of the micromanager. You know what I'm saying? So again, another situation in which you might want to write something down. You know what I'm saying? It's like one of those scenarios where you're confused. Right. So that's basically the 1-on-1 system. It's really, really simple to explain, but it's really, really difficult to execute. Now, have you guys been running it at all over these last few days?
We've
If
been
we play
trying to-
Inferno,
Right. Okay. So why not the other maps? That's the question.
a lot of times I think on, especially Mirage, when we play T side, we do seem to do strats, but I think that's because we haven't set up the defaults yet.
Right. Okay. All right. That's fine. I mean, it comes with time, right? You don't have to jump in. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, you know. But just obviously, how do you feel like? Have you been doing it effectively at all on the map? Does anyone feel like it's not working, or is there any qualms or anything that people have with the system? Or
I mean, like we've got the anchors sorted. It's just like I think it's just communicating with the floaters and knowing like, well, it's kind of like if the apps guy wants to do something and the banana guy wants to do something, it's kind of like confusing for them.
right? Yeah. So you don't want to have overlap, and that's the thing. You just said it's confusing for them, right? So in situations where it's been confusing, the apps guy, do I take apps? Or the banana guy, do I take banana because the apps guy is taking apps? Have you ever talked about that after the prac? You know, oh, I came into a situation where I didn't know whether I should take apps because you guys were deep in banana. Has that been written down and talked about? You know?
No, but it should have been.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's not about, there was nothing wrong in that situation. It was a confusion point. It's like I didn't know what to do. And this is where you would then come as a collective after the BRAC and be like, right, we were confused here. How do we eliminate that confusion for the future? It's all about optimization. How do you optimize the process? And that's basically what you do in engineering, and that's what players have to do in Counter-Strike. It's literally playing games is all about optimization. The more you can optimize and not have to think about things, the better it is. So, as I said, it can be for anything. If you want to jump into a server, we can basically talk about some of these, like some stupid stuff that I've seen over the last however long, like let's say on Inferno, and it's like really simple. So there was like one scenario that we had an endpoint where somebody used the utility, but they didn't know why they used it in a particular way, but they wrote it down. So there was one guy left on the A site, and there were two guys on B. So obviously this guy's already at a risk. And when they were coming towards, what do you call it? The enemies, like, were four guys left, and they were basically executing on the A site. And the guy was in pit, and his initial reaction was to smoke here and basically play like this. Now, nothing wrong at all with this scenario, but he was then confused as to what to do. And everyone could see it. So he didn't know, because he'd thrown this smoke, it basically given the players in apps something to play around. You know, they could easily jump out there. They could easily wait until these guys got contact and then come out, etc. And even though he basically played it the best he can, he basically just made sure that no one was coming up short. And if anyone came out, he was just going to kill them. We still put this down to he confused himself by using the smoke the way he did, and he could have definitely done it better. Now, this is basically what I'm saying is he played the scenario perfectly. He actually won the round for the team, but we sat there and we said, right, we got as a collective at the end of the game, and we said, what was the scenario? So the scenario where he was about to take a 1 and 4, and he had a smoke left with not very long on the clock. So we talked about, in this scenario, what would we decide as individuals would probably be the best play? And the thing which we came up in the end was, basically, you want to, with so little time left, you probably just want to stop them from getting to the site. So we suggested, if we come in that scenario again, why not throw the smoke there and basically just defend and keep yourself alive? So basically just play back here, make sure no one gets onto the site, make sure that no one gets up in here. If anyone's jumping up on there, it's fine because there wasn't much time left, you know? And what that did was it created a guideline for him where it is technically set in stone, but it's like a situation where he was confused as to what to do. He panicked, he threw his smoke at apps, and then he tried to play the best scenario he could. Whereas now he has something more set in stone, you know, or something more that is more of a guidance for him. So, oh, I have a smoke, I'm in a bad situation. Instead of trying to think what's the best thing I can do in this moment and then using your game sense, he now has something to rely on. He has a fallback, something that, because that's what the team agreed that he should probably do. And this is it, is you guys, the scenario is he had to use his game sense. Now, what happens when you don't have that game sense? He luckily had the perfect thing. He made the right choice for the moment, and it worked out for him. But he was completely reliant on all of the hours that had come before and making the right decision in that very moment. Whereas in order to eliminate that, he removed the game sense part, and instead they talked about it as a 5-man group, and they suggested what would probably be the best scenario if he can't think of something at the exact time, you know? And that way, you go from using game sense to using more of an autopilot system, you know, where you just do it because that's what has been told, you know, that's what you do. And what that means is if it goes wrong while using your game sense, it's really hard to justify whether or not you should do it a second time. You know what I'm saying? Whereas if it goes wrong after you've sort of said, okay, we've agreed that this is what we're going to do, if you then do that and then it goes wrong, then you have the ability to review that, and you have the ability to say, okay, that wasn't the best choice. Let's do something else, you know? And then basically pick what's the next best option. So maybe actually throwing it at apps was the best option, you know? And that's basically that. I mean, it's not the best example, but it's that kind of try to optimize the process by don't always rely on yourself and your game sense, but rather bring ideas forward and give yourself a general guideline. And then once you then hit that point, then you can review it. You know, if you're always just relying on does the player make the right choice because he has the right amount of hours in the game and he's approached the situation 10 times? That's not always going to happen. You know what I mean? You're not. So the more you can eliminate the need for game sense, the better it is, in my opinion, for you as a player. Because you can just say, okay, this is what we thought of. I did it. It worked. Great. How do I do it better? Or this is what we thought of. I did it and it. How do I do it better? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it's just come up with really weird examples and sort of just say this is what you do. But what you guys as players need to do, if you're going to use this type of system, is generally think about it. Are you using game sense? Are you confused about any form of scenario? You know, do you know what your teammates are doing? Why don't you know what your teammates are doing? Write that down. Like any scenario where you genuinely think, okay, there's something which could be happening better here, then, you know, that is a point where you can write that scenario down. Now, we obviously talked about the anchor players. Now let's talk about the float type of players, right? So if you want to jump back in Discord, we can basically go over that. So obviously, I want to sort of bring it around to CT at some point because I feel like we're just going to talk about T side today. And the time is already getting short, and I still feel like I haven't made that many points. But let's talk about the float players. So obviously, now, in my opinion, you have some of like the two most important players for making valuable change. So obviously, we mentioned before is basically these three players, they can get their own ways of taking stuff. So the banana guy can say, okay, this is the way I want to take banana. This is the way I think we should do it. And you can basically communicate that to the people that are relevant. You know, is the mid guy ever going to be with you? Communicate that with the mid guy. Are these two players going to be with you? Then these are the two players you want to show. This is how we're taking banana, etc. Or the in-game leader can come up with those ideas, and you can then follow that and improve on that. But what you have is these two players, they're going to see. Yeah. So these players could be in banana one round, they could be in mid the next round, they could be in apps the round after that. And that's the joy of having these float players is you're going to see many, many different scenarios and many different situations in which these players are coming up with ideas and they're basically putting them onto you and then you're executing those ideas. And it's really, really important when you're in these float roles to improve these anchor players. You are going to be approaching many situations where you're confused or you're reliant on these players to be making the right decisions for you. You know, obviously, if you're coming mid, you don't want to be telling the mid guy how he should be thinking about how does he take mid. If he's been taking mid for the 15 rounds in a row, then it's up to him. He should know how do the opponents play. What utility have I been using? Is there anything that I have been doing to condition the opponents that they don't play in certain spots, etc.? So if then you approach that scenario and then you're basically telling that player what to do, then you're making a mistake. You know what I'm saying? Obviously, you can do that, but you don't want to do that every single time. You know, and this is why it's really, really important to have good float players that understand when a mistake's been made and how do you improve on that. So, as I said, let's say you're a float player. Who is that, by the way, on this map? What, like, who's the float players on this map? You guys are pretty important for like seeing lots and lots of different scenarios and basically being confused. Like your jobs is basically to approach new situations almost all the time. Like you're going to be coming in banana, you're going to be coming towards mid, you're going to be coming towards apps. And not only that, if you take these roles onto other maps, if you guys happen to be the floats on basically all the maps, then you're going to be approaching lots of situations where you're going to have to be questioning what's happening, what should I be doing, what's the person who's in charge of me doing, and if there's situations where you're confused, again, you want to write these down. So if one float goes here, the other float goes here. If you're in this type of situation, do you know what banana's doing when you guys are attacking mid? Or vice versa? Does this player know what this float's doing and this team is doing when he's in banana with the other guy? Like, you guys are really, really important for understanding when are you confused and why are you confused, and then basically bringing change upon that, you know? So don't just approach a situation exactly 100% sure what's going on and then just give it your best and then just sort of write that off as, oh, it worked, that's great, you know? You always want to be, okay, let's say Crazy pulls both of you mid, then and you're being told to do something or whatever, but it's completely random and it's just completely in the moment, then you might want to write that down. Like, oh, okay, we did this round and it was just completely nothing which we've ever done before, but actually it was really, really good. You know, it was a good idea. You know, it was something that we hadn't done before and it worked perfectly. Write that down. That could be a new idea for what Crazy could do when taking mid with 2 float players. You know what I'm saying? So these are the type of things which, like, you guys as float players really need to be doing. Things which are happening around the map and trying to always improve these anchor players. Your job is to assist the anchor players at getting better at their stuff. You know, they're not going to always have anchor players with them. Sometimes they're going to have anchor players with them. Sometimes it might be 2, sometimes even 3. They might even pull one of the other anchor players as well as both the floats. So it's really, really important that you guys see, is there a new situation that you're in, or is there something that you did that was way better than you've ever done it before, or anything like that, you know? Like, it's really, really important. So anyway, we talked a lot about writing stuff down. I'm sure now. But is everyone sort of understanding, like, oh, there is an importance to this, just doing something and then really giving it a good review? And then does everyone sort of understand how that could help? Or are
Yeah.
people sat here like, nah, I don't think that this is going to help at all, actually?
Yeah, I think it would help.
Personally,
so
yeah.
we could avoid mistakes later and do everything right.
Yeah, like, as I said, like, it is hard, right? It's really, really difficult. But like, I can also say from personal experience, I worked, just like a bit of background on me. I worked in the oil and the oil industry for 5 years, like as an engineer, and I can tell you, I never improved at all. And then I came to Tesla, and the whole philosophy is constant improvement. Like, you have to come the day after, the next day, sorry, and you have to somehow be better than you were the day before. And it's really hard to find something that you could improve on or you could make better. But once you get into the habit of it, it really becomes difficult to not do it. You know, when you see people just literally coming online, playing pugs and whatever, not actually doing any improvement, and you've been doing it actively for weeks, you really notice that people are just lazy, you know? So what I would say is try and get into the habit of doing it. But it could be one thing a day. You play a whole you play a whole scrim session, like 3 games, and you write down one thing. Yeah, and then you come on the next day and you say, right, let's say it could be Crazy, and he sees something that him and Fing could have done better for taking, let's say, mid control. I don't know if that situation is ever going to happen, but let's say Crazy sees
Hopefully
something that
not.
him and Fing could have done better while taking mid control. He writes that down. You come the next day and you say, right, we took mid, we did it this way. This is how we could have done it potentially better. Bang. That's one thing that you've now talked about and potentially now you can improve upon, you know? You approach the situation which has been talked about. You potentially do it exactly how you planned, or like how was like lined out, and it worked. But was it the best thing to do? Maybe you could have done it better. You know, this is the thing. It's like, if you have nothing sort of as guidelines, you're just completely playing off game sense, and that works fine with defaulting and strats. But if you want to genuinely improve, like, it's really, really difficult to do that in a short time span if you don't look at basically getting like a general guideline for something, trying to follow it, and when it goes better or worse than how you sort of laid out, then improving on it. If you don't do that, then, as I said, you're just playing off your head. You're just playing off, you know, or if you have strats, you just run the strat 15 times and you'll slowly improve it, but it's slow, you know? Whereas if you have like a strat and it's more of like, let's say, a guideline, let's say you have a strat, but instead of saying exactly what mollies to throw and stuff, you just use smokes. So let's say you have a strat for Inferno, you throw this smoke, you throw this smoke, for example, I don't know, could be 2 random smokes. Instead of saying, right, we're going to throw this molly and we're going to throw a double nade here, if you don't involve any of that stuff, but you just give the guideline with the strat is basically the smokes, you approach that situation 15 times, and every time you go, right, there was a guy in pit. boys, we could have double naded him. You know, we had two grenades right there. Or the next time it's like, oh, we had a molly. We threw a molly in pit and the guy smoked it. And let's say this smoke isn't here, and the guy smoked it, and he then had a one-way and killed you all. Then, if you really set in stone what the strat is, then it's hard to improve on that fact. But if you don't set in stone what the strat is, but it's more of a rough guideline, you can easily say, right, let's chop that out. You know, oh, if he's going to smoke our molly like this, right, the right wall, let's say, or we'll just stay back and wait until his smoke's gone, and then it'll re-exec. You know. And that's the joy of giving yourself guidelines, because when you set things so hard in stone, it becomes really hard to chop things out, you know, or improve on the fact. So, anyway, basically, my point has been made clear. I'll be happy to explain more in detail about that if anyone wants to drop me a message after. If anyone wants to sort of just chat after this session, like if anyone's confused, then just let me know. But that's my general take on the 1-1-1 system. It is a default, it is a pug, it is sort of open-ended, and it's whatever the in-game leader sort of decides. But the best way, in my opinion, to improve on that 1-1-1 system is with that development curve. It's like, think of an idea, give a rough a guideline on how you want to do it, approach that situation 15 times, and then improve on that fact, you know? Is there something that you could have done more efficiently? Was it too little? You know, could you improve more utility, etc.? Was anybody in genuine confusion about anything, etc.? And basically improving on that fact. Obviously, there's loads and loads of ways you can do this. As I said, we can hopefully get more ways when we talk over the CT side. But everyone's on board with that. Is anyone thinking, nah, Cass, I'm not really happy about that? Because if so, that's good. You know, it's good. It's healthy to say, you know, I'm not in agreement, you know?
No, I think I understand it.
Great.
I think
Yeah, that's
everyone's fine.
Okay, so I'm gonna give I'll give one more example before we move on. Actually, so we will use overpass. Now the reason why I'm going to use overpass is because it's a hyper adaptive default system. So you can go one round from like a 3-on-1 to the next round to like a 1-1-3. You know, and the round after that you might even go like 1-3-1 if you're feeling a bit spicy. So it's like a map where you can be hyper adaptive with defaults. Now the one thing which is really good on this map is the anchors always basically play together. So let's say the B anchor wants to take B short and he doesn't have anyone with him, then he might do it in partnership with the connector player, you know, and vice versa. So let's say you've got one guy here and one guy here, and you've got 3 down here, and this guy wants to take mid, then you can do it in partnership with this guy. You know what I'm saying? So I'm going to use this example because I think it's a good one. Let's say you're the con player and doing, then, you know, but you want to take, let's say, short control, then this would be a situation in which you can talk about that. You know, like, oh, I wanted to take short control this one game, but I had no idea what the hell you were doing. Why? Is it because the guy wasn't communicating? Were you confused because of any other number of reasons? You know, was it because of the way he was using his utility, or was he trying to get a bit ballsy, taking a peek here or something, and you were like, okay, why the hell is he doing that? You know, a lot of things do rely on communication, but this is like a scenario in which if you see you're confused about what another player is doing, again, it's about just get some guideline about what you want to do. If you want to take short control, you're the connector player, but you want to use the B player, then preferably you want to have something sort of laid out, you know, or this is the way that we could basically try and do this. You know, you could molly here, flash me over, I can come out connector. Really simple. You can approach that situation 10 times. The molly there, maybe we just didn't even need the molly. Cut the molly out, try it again, you know, do it another 10 times, etc., etc. So again, just now let's talk about the CT side. Do you guys have a way of basically writing down a way of like improve, like these improvement points? You know, it's good writing something down on a notepad, but you have to like document it somewhere. Or do you want me to show you a basic way that you can do that?
Well, I was just gonna do something like that on Google Docs, but I mean, if there's a better way, then by all
Nope.
means.
That's it. So call it Inferno, and you can say, right, you can come on and say, right, I've got 1 point from today. Crazy.
I'm a bit attacked again.
Mid in mid. And then basically that's your point, and you can say, right, I'm going to highlight this red because it's in urgent need. And what you can do is the next day, you can come on with, let's say you want to discuss, you did some form of mid take and you were confused. You want to discuss that. So what you can do is you can talk about it. Why were you confused? Improve on that. And then you can go, right, we're going to now highlight that orange. And then you only then highlight that green when whatever you talked about is you're definitely aware of that situation. You know exactly what to do when that similar thing comes up. Okay, then I'm happy, you know? And then you can leave it in the doc. And after a month, you can come back and you can review it. Oh, I talked with Crazy about taking mid this one time. How many times, like, have you actually approached this situation again? Are you still happy with it? Yes, I think it's still a green. I'm still happy with it. Then I'll leave it. If you're thinking, we talked about it, but actually we, because it needs talking about, or maybe red because it's absolutely awful and this is an urgent matter. You know what I'm saying? So this is basically what I'd recommend to you guys is over time, you will fill up these documents. If, as I said, if everyone can get one thing per day. No.
He's
Floor.
off floater.
In city side, I
On
play one.
T-side.
I'm
The floor.
floating.
He's Oper.
Right. So you're an AWPer. So you can say, right, you can say, we're confused. When should I be in banana? You know, you're confused. You don't know if at the start of the round, no one really said what you should be doing. The in-game leader didn't really make a call. Am I in banana or am I going mid with Crazy? Then you might want to write that down. And then the next day, when you come on, you do a 1 hour session to start the day off, you know, talk about all of these problems. Then you can go, right, boys, in what scenarios should I be playing my open banana? In what scenarios, if I have an AWP, should I be going mid? Is there any scenario in which I'm going apps, you know? And then talk about these things. Again, highlight in orange, approach those situations. After a few days, you're like, okay, I'm happy. I now know when I should be in banana, when I shouldn't be in banana. I'm going to make that green. You're going to run into that mistake of playing 10,000 hours and then becoming a professional instead of, if you can really improve that and probably bring that down to a good 5K if you really push and drive this idea of it, this self-improvement forward. Right, we're going to now move on to the CT side, and it's basically going to be the exact same concept. So what I think is really important, boys, is same scenario. So anytime you're confused, anytime you're approaching a new situation, if you're doing an individual play, if you're doing a team play, whatever it is, then basically you want to write that down. So obviously for banana, is there any way you guys particularly like playing CT banana? CT Inferno, not banana, sorry. Is there anything in particular that you do as a team?
I know, like, consistently, we'll do 3B banana, one with kit, one throws like a grenade or a flash, and especially trying to control the banana control. If they rush, then it's kind of like, you know what to do, like fall back, or if there's no one there, then you might take in, someone might rotate around to A.
Right, okay. So basically a nice 3-2 start is maybe a 50% chance, right? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah.
Right. That's great. So you have a defined way, as we talked about on the T side, you have sort of a way that you have an outline of roughly how you guys play as a team. That's all great. So for the A players, how many situations do you guys have outlined, like not set in stone, but rough guidelines of, do you ever play aggressive when you're just two people? Do you play passive when you're just two people? What setups do you have for playing 2 towards A and 3B early? Do you have setups for if these guys want to go aggressive and take lower banana control? Do you have any way of assisting that, etc.? Like, this is basically what you want to do. And if there's any situations where you come into this document, you type down CT, and you basically then ask these questions, you know, what do we do on A if they go aggressive on B? Can you answer that question honestly with both players and come up with the same answer? If not, maybe write it down, you know, because it's something that you haven't discussed before. Or what happens if they're playing aggressive? Do we need to play passive? Write that down because it's something that you maybe don't know. And what you want to do is you basically want to do the exact same thing where you want to ask these types of questions every time, like, oh, you approach a new situation, you're going 3 towards B, but these guys are going to play more towards site. Have you ever approached that situation before? How do you deal with that? What if the opponents don't get baited into taking banana control, and then you've got 3 towards B and you think that you could instantly be attacked towards A? How do you guys play on A site with the fact that the enemies potentially don't have banana control? You know, that's like, these are all questions which you can ask yourself. And what you then do is, again, you just write them down and you talk with the people that are relevant. So the 2A players, with all of these ways of playing A and all of the different scenarios in which you can approach with 3B, 2A, then you want to have a big list of ways that you guys can basically give yourself guidelines of what do we do in this situation, or what do we do in that situation, or, you know, etc., etc. Talk between yourselves. You don't have to do it with the rest of the team. You come on for the day. Yeah, so obviously it would be for you guys. Like, let's say Crazy, you come online, things online, and you have notepad on your desk or whatever, then why not just say, bro, this happened yesterday. Can we just talk about that? You know, before prac, just do it. You know, do it between yourselves. You don't have to wait until prac. Prove as much as you can. So obviously, as I said, that's for the 3-2. But what happens when it's the opposite way around? You know, what about 2-3? Sorry. Then again, it's the exact same questions from the other side. You know, do these guys go aggressive when you're 3 towards B? Is that highlighted as a team? Have you talked about that as a team? You know, what if these guys want to go aggressive and these guys also want to go aggressive? Then how much aggression should these guys give? Do we know the answer to that? You know what I mean? And this is basically, as individuals, you're 5 individuals and you're 2 separate groups. Like, you're a group here and you're a group here, 2 sites and 5 individuals. You can ask yourself, and you can, before you even play one single game on Inferno, when you're a brand new team, you could ask yourself 10,000 different, and you could discuss so many situations through before you even play one game. But basically, everyone just jumps in because they just want to play. And I think that it's not a mistake by any means, but it's definitely something that people could improve on, is this whole improvement area. As I mentioned, I gave the example. My screen is being shared, right? I'm just drawing for myself here.
Yeah, it's sharing.
As we said, like, let's say Ancient dies here, and the opponents have the ability to go CT, they have the ability to wrap long, and you have a guy on site, you have a guy on pit. Now, how did you guys play as 4 people when this is the potential? How do we protect CT and long at the same time and make sure that we don't lose the A site and the B site, you know, with 2 players on this site and 2 players on this site? Has this ever been discussed? Or if this situation was to come up in a game in an hour's time, would you know what you're doing? Probably not.
We'd probably just wing it in the moment.
The basic way to see play, like we will play like one could go church or runes or whatever and host TC, and then try and do something like that. But no, you wouldn't have a set play.
Exactly, right? You don't have something set, but it would be a wing. It would literally potentially be CT. You have a guy coils, then he's probably just going to rotate here, right? And he's just going to... And that's great and all, but what if we can give ourselves some rough guidelines? What if we find ourselves in a situation where this is the thing? Have a conversation about what we might want to do. So you mentioned about that. What you mentioned there, Luke, is exactly what I would say, is basically what I would preferably want. If I'm a B-site player and they could potentially be CT, I would potentially want one of angle, in my opinion. And this is something that you can have that conversation about. The same with the A site. If I'm on site, right, and I know that someone could wrap up my long, I preferably don't want to be watching long. And the reason why is if I watch this way, I can watch both short and apps at the same time. So what I would probably say is in this situation, I'd probably have my pit guy, if I have a guy in pit, preferably watching my long. But the question is, if this was to happen, are you guys instantly going to be able to just go, oh, this is what we do? Probably not, because you haven't talked about it, and it would be a case of winging it. And then the scenario gets there is, you don't, as I said, you don't want to try and put this set. Some stuff like this maybe it is a little bit set, right? Because it's the CT side, you can be a bit more like can be a bit more strict with having a couple of set things. But for the T side, not so much, I would say. But in this situation, like what we did exactly this on Endpoint. We discussed this scenario many times over, and we gave ourselves these guidelines. And what ended up happening in the end is we became so good at it is when we lost long, or not even lost long, when we just gave up long, we became so good at knowing exactly who's doing what and when who's doing what that no one had to talk anymore. People just knew, oh, my pit guy is going to be watching my long. I can just focus on short and apps, you know? And the same with the B site. So if you, like, we had a couple of scenarios where Mezzi would play here and the other guy would play, Max would basically play here, then Max would fall back and Mezzi would also potentially just go forward or even stay in this situation but stay hidden, you know, and just basically watch this. And they would do that with no conversation at all, just literally just like not a single word. People would know what the hell is going on. And I think this is, I talked about earlier about that optimization. You know, if you have to, in the moment, say, oh, I'm watching this, or you should watch that, or what are you watching, you know, and you're having to basically get all of these comms through, it becomes quite messy. But if you can basically have a lot more optimization and have these things pre-discussed as much as possible without basically having it completely set in stone, then it becomes much easier for you guys as a team. And as I said, you can write everything down that you wish to write down. What's really important is bring your teammates with you. So, what do you call it? Like if a situation in which you think a good setup would be, like you got wrecked on the A site because you were playing site, your pit guy was playing pit, and Ancient had no info long or something, and you come up with this situation, then you might say, okay, right. You might want to write down, right, we had no info. How could we get info? And then you could basically write down, how do we get info? Write down the situation that occurred. You know, oh, we had a guy on long with an AWP, but he had no info. We had a guy on, you were on site. We had a guy in pit. Info on B. You could write this scenario down, and then basically before the game or before prac starts, you can basically get together with your A guys, discuss the scenario through, and then basically talk about how you're going to improve it. You've already discussed what it is that you roughly want to do, and everyone can automatically go into autopilot mode and start doing it. You know what I'm saying? So that's basically that. Now, as I said, the unfortunate thing that I've done here today, and this is where it really sucks to be a coach, is all I've done is given some really brief examples, and I've given a general overview of what you should do going forward. The hardest part is actually doing it. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave that in your guys' hands. Like, you have to practice this stuff. Like, as a coach, say, this is exactly what you've got to do, you know? What you got to do is you got to learn how to do this stuff yourself. But I was trialing this with a Swedish team, and I can honestly say I've never done this before with any other team, apart from basically I did it for the last few weeks at Endpoint, and then when I started my new job, I came up with the idea and I was trialing it on a team called WRAH. And they got in advance this season after struggling for like 3 seasons in a row in Maine. They got in advance, no problem at all, using this method. And they also use the 1-on-1 system, and they said it works completely fine. You know, every day, sometimes they talk more than they prac, and they say that that's not a problem. In the past, they always said that talking more than pracking is horrible, and that was the absolute attitude they had. But nowadays, it's very hard to convince them to play more prac and talk less, you know? So obviously it works for them. It's not going to work for everyone. There's no perfect system. You know what I'm saying? But what I'm saying, what I kind of want you to do is kind of be open-minded, give this a go. And if you have any questions, it's basically, you know, you can refer back to me. You can ask me, you know, I'm struggling to write anything down, etc. I can potentially put some ideas forward. You know what I'm saying? Now, does anyone have any questions? Obviously, as I said, I feel like it is a bit of a letdown as a coach. Like it's sometimes really difficult to, I can bring these ideas forward, but I'm not really helping that much. That you've got to do a lot of the work yourself here. This is a self-sufficient system. So has anyone got any questions to that? Or not really?
in terms of being a stand-in, what should I? Because obviously I won't be playing as a core 5 with them. What is there anything in particular that I should work on? Or
As a stand-in?
As a stand-in, yeah.
I mean,
or anything I should focus on.
I mean, one of the things which I think is obviously you've got to do as a stand-in is I feel like you have to definitely understand what's going on. So sometimes I like how often is it that you're probably going to be standing in is the question.
Yeah, I don't exactly know that myself.
That's the thing. So it's obviously down to are people here or not. So what I would say is for you, it's just a case of trying to be updated with the team and stuff. But because obviously you're not playing like in the core the whole time, sometimes you might just want to be here for prac. Sometimes, yeah, whatever the situation is, you might just want to try and array for prac. Sometimes I feel like I was so bored. But what I would say is in the days where, I know I'm standing in for this game, learn whatever position you're in. If you're in a float position, if you're in an anchor position, then you need to speak with the players that are around you. You know, if we go back on Inferno, if you can still see my screen, if you happen to be the guy who floats banana, then you need to talk with who you're going to be playing with. You're going to be playing with Asian. You're going to be playing with, I believe, Fing, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so these are the two players. You immediately need to say, right, what have you guys discussed before? How do you take banana? You need to get all of these things in your head.
So being on the same page.
Yeah, basically. Like, obviously, that's self-explanatory, but it's more like that's really easy to do with strats. Where you're standing in, you need to immediately be proactive. Being proactive is the best thing, and being like, right, bro, Thing, I need an hour. Let's talk about all the ways you take banana control. Ancient. But yeah. Anyway, is that sort of answer the question?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Has anyone else got any other questions? Obviously, Topple, I was kind of expecting you to bombard me, being potentially the in-game leader. So, if you got anything, fire away, dude.
I just go through setups with the boys, like what I want them to do. I'm quite good with util and whatever, so I've just been going through map to map on different sites, giving the boys some like advice on what I think they should do, how they should hold the setups they should have with each other. Like, for Inferno, for example, like on short, if the other team take brackets and the guy pit mollies offshore and then holds the flash ready for the long person and the site person, so he can then flash them into retake brackets and they'll just get free kills.
Yeah.
I go through like setups like that on maps. Just what I think they should do, like the util that they should know. Just obviously everyone in this team has different experience and different levels and whatever, so I'm just going through everything just so everyone's on the same page and everyone knows every piece of util. So that if the floaters happen to be on different sites or whatever, they still know what everyone should know.
Yeah.
If someone asks for a banana flash, then they know what to do or whatever.
Yeah.
That's basically what I've been going through. But I haven't IGL before. I'm just going through this is the first team that I've had to IGL for, but I don't it's whatever.
Yeah. Well, like you made a point there, which I think's kind of perfect, where you mentioned about, if the opponents take short, then someone can be ready with a flash, etc., etc. And that's one of them scenarios where, like, it can be set because it's sort of like the CT side, but you can also have it like a general guideline. And what's really important then is for the players which are in that scenario to improve on that fact. So if as an in-game leader you bring stuff forward, then it's really important that the players genuinely improve on it, It's not just about what did the guy say, what did he introduce, and then just accepting that and never really doing anything more with it. You know what I'm saying? So you guys as a team, if Topple brings ideas, brings strats, you always want to be looking at how do you improve on that fact, you know? Not just taking it at face value and doing nothing more than that. Yeah. Obviously, the one a bit of advice that I'll give to you, Topple, and really all of you should sort of pay attention to this, is in-game leading doesn't need to be hard. A lot of people make it way harder for themselves than it needs to be. Offload your stress on other people. You know, this is again something which I'll mention from Tesla. It's something which I've never seen before. There is a chain of command system at my work, so you'll have like one manager and he'll be in charge of 30 people, but it's not like a manager, but it's rather just like a leader, a guy who offsets all the workload on across the whole spectrum of players. And this is what I think is really important to do on Counter-Strike, is a lot of in-game leaders, they take so much responsibility on themselves. They're micromanaging, they're coming up with the strats, they're coming up with how to take map control, they're coming up with how to set up on CT. If you find yourself in a situation where your in-game leader's telling you what to do or how to do it or how to take map control in your area of the map or how to position yourself, that's an immediate point where as a person you need to say, hang on, why? You know? Like, there shouldn't really be a situation where you accept the fact that somebody's telling you how to do things instead of you coming up with those ideas yourself. So if you find yourself in those scenarios where you're having to be micromanaged, where someone's having to say exactly what to do and stuff, try and get that written down somewhere and be like, right, how do I improve on this fact? You know, don't become self-reliant, don't become reliant on other people, but become self-reliant on yourself. You know what I'm saying? So it's really going to help with it as a team in the whole in-game leading department with you, Topple, is don't try and do everything yourself. But if you see a situation where you take banana control and then the next logical step would potentially be to take mid and Crazy doesn't say anything, then you might want to be like, yo, right, this game, Crazy, I saw that, you know, you weren't really taking mid that much. And I felt like I might have had to say that, like, you know, you need to take mid right now. That could be a situation in which you could say, right, I feel like it's your responsibility as the mid player to try and know when to take mid. You know, do you need to discuss that with us as a team, etc., etc., or the apps player? Who was that again? That was
Well, it'll be Topple.
Yeah, I usually go ups.
yeah. So obviously that would be you, but let's say again, you're not really taking apps so much because you're focusing on other aspects, like who's taking banana control or when are they taking banana control or how. If you're focusing on those things, then you need to obviously. I'm struggling with taking apps because you guys like aren't taking banana the way you could be doing it better, etc. Get that written down, talk about it as a team, offload that part of the in-game leading, so to say, in quotations, onto other people. You know, think you're the guy in control of banana. Not ever, but be very aware that if you're micromanaging people, that means they need to improve. And the very first thing that I said is you're only as good as your weakest part. And that's exactly that. If you're micromanaging for someone, it's because they need to improve something because they're either not coming up with the ideas themselves or you don't trust them enough that they're going to make those ideas, not going to bring them forward into fruition. So therefore, you need to say, right, bro, I was micromanaging you here. Why? Like, we need to discuss that. Like, why didn't you come up with the idea yourself? You know, bring everybody up with you. Don't just be a guy. Like, if you see someone struggling, help. As I said, I don't know how many of you guys are British, but I was literally in the best British team for a year and a half, and the reason why it failed was because 4 of us, and that was what killed the team. So, like, one of the best things to do is definitely to bring everyone up with you. All right, we got any other questions? Is there anything today where people are like, right, I'm not exactly 100% sure what we discussed, or is there a better example that I can give? Is there any? Or any?
A lot of what you've been speaking about is kind of like my ideology on the game anyway. Like when I was playing in an open team last season, and sort of the advice that I was giving is quite a lot of what you said with the 1-1-1 thing. That's sort of, as long as you have people controlling areas and you have the information. Well, Counter-Strike's more of an information game than a kill game. If you have the information, then you know where to go. If
Right.
no one's on the side, then you don't even have to get a kill to win a round, effectively.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of see the game. If you can get the info, you don't necessarily have to kill anyone to win a round.
Yep.
So that's I guess my ideology.
Yep. Obviously, there is some stuff that I will mention. Obviously, there's literally like 10 different. There's more than. There's probably like 100 different ways that you can play defaults. You know, I don't know if any of you have looked at my YouTube at all, but I have different videos on some different ideas of how to use certain strategies within defaults to win rounds. So, for example, I mentioned conditioning earlier. If you guys aren't fully aware of what conditioning is, a very, very simple explanation for that is basically like using some form of tactic. It can be a number of different tactics, from sound or utility usage to a strategical or default type of tactic, or any number of things to basically convince the opponent to play differently to how they would like to play. That's one tactic of many of something that you can add into defaults. And this is something that Astralis did really, really well in their 2019 to 2020 run, is they could basically use really, really well utility conditioning to convince opponents to play in the positions that they don't want to play in, you know? And I have YouTube videos basically explaining how to do this stuff. If you guys want, go and watch them. And as you've probably heard today, I repeat myself about 500 times. So you can just slap the video on 1.5 times speed and you'll understand everything just fine, you know? But like, as I said, like a good example I can give there is on Overpass. Like Big you guys are fine with me talking like another few minutes, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So like Big did a time in August of last year. They saw that they were playing against Vitality, I believe. They saw that RPK always played here, and they specifically added something into their default to utility condition this player into playing a different spot, and it took them 6 rounds in order to achieve it. So what they did was the first round, they double naded this spot. Didn't kill him, but they definitely checked the utility. The next round he came to the same spot, they mollied him, and he put it out with a smoke. The round after that, they triple naded this spot, and they killed him. So 3 rounds in a row, still going to the same spot. Then they finally, to basically, after a couple more rounds, they left it be. I think it was just Santaris was just throwing this molly here, and they wasn't really doing anything. I think one of those rounds, a guy came out of con and basically lobbed a nade there, but they basically left him alone for a couple of rounds. And then the final time that here, 3 guys came out of connector, and after the molly, RPK smoked it, and then they triple naded after he'd smoked it because he thought he was safe, and they killed him. And after that point, RPK stopped playing barrels. He just literally went and played somewhere else because he realized they were... I don't expect you guys as players to watch demos and find out where do the opponents play and then coming up with ways to condition them, etc. But this is something which they could have potentially even figured out during the game. You know, they would have had to double nade that once, click the leaderboards, it shows you utility damage. Oh, we both did 40 damage. There's definitely a guy who plays barrels. The round after that, do the same thing. Or if... Do they always throw nades from this location? When you throw mollies here, are you getting tick damage? Are you getting 1 tick, 2 tick damage every single round? Are you getting that? Well, instead of throwing mollies, because you're only getting 1 or 2 tick damage every time, the fallen molly, start double nading it, for example. And this is stuff that you can basically do and you can introduce into your game. It's just one aspect of defaulting is basically conditioning. That can come from, again, the float players. You know, those guys play in those positions. You guys can get really, really good at conditioning the opponents to not want to play in the positions they want to play in. Your direct know what you do, you know what the opponents do, you know how you want to play, you know how they want to play, and you can basically condition them to play differently, you know? And I have a whole YouTube video on that. Recommend, go and watch it. It's explained in a way that hopefully a baby should understand, so no one should really have a problem there. It's a little bit annoying, but it is what it is. But again, like something else that you can add into your defaults that can massively improve the way these anchor players play, you know? And it's again something that you can obviously find out as float players. You can say, and write that down in the sheet. Why didn't crazy? This guy always plays on long, and we always smoke it. No, like a smoke here, for example, but they always like boost over the top of it, and you never really notice. Then it's something that you can mention. Yo, bro, why didn't we just start double nading in front of stack, in front of the wall or something? You know, just add in WRAH is disconnected now. He's back. Just adding conditioning within the default. You know, why didn't we see that? Write it down. Talk about it.
Also, speaking of schedule, what
Yeah,
three
you
maps
do
do you
it,
want to veto?
You two get schedule going, man. In terms of like when you guys prac, what time, like what's going on.
Yeah.
So either like, you know, what he's saying, like an hour before we even play any game, we discuss what the plan is, you know,
Yeah, what to work
talking,
on.
and then
Well,
yeah.
I still need to go through a lot. I was speaking to WRAH the other day about this, like when we were just doing our own bit on B site Inferno, what we wanted to improve on. I don't want to, but I want everyone to know every piece of util, so people can throw it for each other.
Yeah.
Obviously, people are going to have different experiences and like know. And some of you, I know your util is actually really good, but then there's some things that I'm going to show you that you probably won't know. I'm going to go through everything. And I want to go through setups on different maps. You might know them, but it's just better if, you know, I treat you as if you were new to this game, so then everyone knows everything. I just think that's the best way of going about it, because obviously none of us have experience playing with each other before, or like some of us don't.
Do it.
I am back.
Over.
Anyone got any questions? You might be thinking there isn't anything sort of new that you've learned, but the idea that I wanted to drive home today, because I think this is probably the most important aspect of playing video games, that basically always new situations and you're not really learning anything from it. You know what I'm saying? So you guys have to be really self-aware of that. Like, it took me 2,000 or so hours before that clicked, and then I've only been playing this game for 4K hours, but I did just fine in the time that I played. And I think the general take that I have is the players which do the best, always the players that are always working on self-improvement. I coached in a team Linus and ZTR, who both went on to NIP. I coached QB, who went to Sprout. Jazar, who played with Fnatic for a bit.
Coach Jazar.
Yeah, he's
yeah, no, that's interesting.
who else was there? But like all of these players, they always had like one thing in particular. The guys who genuinely had some success, not always the best success, but always like some, you know, always the players who put in more effort than the rest. The guys who actually self-improved and wrote stuff down. The same with the whole Endpoint squad. Mezzi was a standout. Just a standout, phenomenal guy. He would come on sometimes early in the morning and he would come on the TeamSpeak and he would message another player like Thomas to come online, and they'd be talking about, Mezzi would be like, yo bro, I watched our official from yesterday at like 2 a.m, and he's already talking about how do they improve the way they played the CT side yesterday. You know, not everyone has the ability to come from a loss, instantly review it and be like, right, But if the rumors are correct, there's a chance that this guy is going to be going to a tier 1 team, you know?
Oh, yeah,
There's a reason. There's a thing. And it's not just because he has good aim, but it's because he's a solid all-round player who, like, he basically ran a lot of our sessions. As a coach, I had it very, very easy there, you know? Like, he would come online and he would talk for an hour sometimes. As a support player who doesn't do any in-game leading, he would sometimes run the whole session himself, just off a demo that he watched from the day before. And he would use these methods. So don't overlook this stuff. Like, in a week time, you might be sat there and you might not even think about this session ever again. And you might never even use a single one of these methods. But honestly, just be open-minded, give it a go. And at the end of the day, the only thing you can say is, nah, it's not really for me. I'm okay. You know?
Yeah.
Right.
For going into demo reviews, what's kind of like the main features that we should kind of be watching besides obviously like the obvious being like mistakes and whatnot?
Yeah, I think obviously apart from mistakes, I feel like the big one is asking, when were you confused? Because there can be situations in which you don't see a mistake from the demo, but you remember back nothing from it. You know what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
if you try, like, preferably try and watch demos as soon as you can after a loss or after a win. Like, basically as the moment after, preferably. That's something that you really want to get into a good habit of. And then any situation where, again, you were confused in that moment, and talked about as fast as possible. Because if you watch a demo after a week, you've forgotten everything. And then what you're looking for is mistakes. Because you'll look at something, you'll be like, that worked perfectly, that must have been great. But then if you watched it right after the fact and it worked perfectly, you might be like, oh, you know? Well, it still worked out. But that could have been something that you could have written down in the moment and been like, right, we need to talk about why was our comms so bad there? Even though it worked out perfectly, that written down and let's get that talked about, because we can't have that situation happen again, you know? So that would basically be my big one for demos, is obviously look for the mistakes, yes, but get them reviewed as fast as possible, even after losses immediately, so that you can write down anything which is not so obvious when you don't have any context.
Okay.
Obviously, there's a whole, bro, we could talk for 5 hours about what to watch in demo. Like a general take, that's my biggest one, is don't wait to watch demos. Get them watched instantly. Take that to the side for a moment and watch the demo. Like, don't wait until 2 days later.
Okay. Is there anything else?
I was just gonna ask, should we watch the demos alone, or would it be beneficial to watch them as a team? Obviously, not all of them, but
yeah. It definitely depends. Watching them alone, completely fine. But let's say CT side is a really good one. Definitely recommend watching it with a teammate. Now, obviously, you guys don't have ESEA Insider, but it would be a recommendation from me.
So let's say me and Ancient play on B.
Right.
We would both watch that demo together and how we did on B.
Yeah, because you can watch your POV, he can watch his POV, and then if you get into a situation where you're both watching, then you have both of you that you can riff off. Whereas if you're watching it, you're going to be biased towards yourself, and you'll be like, right, hang on. You know? And that might not be the case. It's best to have both people's opinions, because then you can both be like, hang on.
Come to an agreement on how to improve after.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
You always have a bias towards yourself when watching demos, so it's always good to have a second opinion. You always want to be in the right, you know? I don't know. That's
Yeah.
like a human nature thing.
Yeah.
Anything else? Yeah, obviously, I'll stop the recording here if that's fine with everyone, because obviously I
Yeah.
don't think
Yeah.
there's much more that can be recorded.